Okay, let's get started. We're looking at Chinese President Xi Jinping's state visit to Russia,
Yeah.
invited by President Putin, happening May 7th to 10th.
Right. And a really key part of this is his attendance at the 80th anniversary celebrations for Victory Day in Moscow, the Great Patriotic War, as it's known there.
Exactly. And this visit, well, it really puts a spotlight on the China-Russia relationship, doesn't it? Especially now, with everything going on globally. It feels significant.
It absolutely does. The timing, the context, it signals something important about their alignment in this complex international environment we keep talking about.
So for this deep dive, our mission is to really unpack that significance. What does this collaboration, especially the joint commemoration of the WWII victory, actually mean?
And also, what role might they be trying to carve out together in shaping, well, global governance going forward?
Right. And for you listening, particularly if you're keeping tabs on international relations for something like the UPSC exams, getting these nuances is, well, pretty vital.
Definitely. So our main source here is an interview from the Global Times. It features Leonid Kovachich, who is a Russian sinologist and economist.
Okay, so Kovacich's insights. What's his first take on the visit itself?
Well, he stresses something important right away. This isn't just about Victory Day. Yes, that's a component, but it's framed as a full state visit.
Meaning a proper agenda, bilateral talks, the works.
Exactly. He says the leaders will be discussing the current state of their relationship, trade, diplomacy, all that, but also crucially how they're working together on the world stage in international forums.
So it has this twofold significance then.
Precisely. On one level, it's about honoring the past, the huge sacrifices made in World War II fighting fascism.
A powerful historical moment to share.
But then, looking forward, it's also about aligning their, let's say, strategic positions on major global issues where they see eye to eye.
So as you watch the news reports, remember there's the ceremony, but underneath that, there's likely some serious diplomatic discussion happening that could have wider ripple effects. Okay, let's delve into that commemoration piece more. The 80th anniversary of the WWII victory. Why does Kovachich think this historical event is still so central?
He really grounds it in the idea that the defeat of fascism, by the Allied coalition, was fundamentally transformative.
How so?
He argues that the whole international system we have today, the one centered around the United Nations, its roots are directly in that victory and the desire to prevent something like that ever happening again.
That makes sense. The UN Charter, international law, it all came out of that period.
Yeah, and he points out that sticking to the UN Charter, despite all the local conflicts we've seen, has arguably been key in preventing another full-blown world war.
It's quite a claim, but you can see the logic.
And this links to something President Xi often mentions, this idea that the world is going through changes like we haven't seen in a century. Big shifts.
Political, economic, social, across the board.
Yes. Kovachich sees this kind of structural change as, well, almost a natural process of development. Societies evolve, global structures need to adapt.
But he flags a danger in this period of change, right?
He does, a major one. The risk of forgetting the lessons of history, or maybe worse, actively twisting history for political reasons today.
Like trying to rewrite the narrative.
Exactly. He specifically mentions the danger of trying to replace the UN Charter, this agreed-upon foundation, with vague, undefined rules.
Which could weaken the UN itself.
That's the concern. Undermining the UN's authority could lead to, well, more instability, maybe even chaos globally.
And he's worried about specific distortions, like around Nazism.
Yes, he seems quite concerned about a trend of reinterpreting history, sometimes even in ways that seem to justify or downplay the evils of Nazism, all for political expediency.
Wow.
And this is where Russia's own history comes in strongly. As the successor to the Soviet Union, which, suffered unimaginable losses fighting fascism on the Eastern Front.
The scale of sacrifice was immense.
Absolutely. So there's a very deep culturally ingrained sense in Russia of why preserving that historical memory accurately is so vital.
And it's not just a Russia-China perspective. Kovachich mentions others are involved.
He does. He notes that leaders from dozens of countries are expected at Russia's commemoration events.
So that suggests a broader agreement on the importance of remembering.
It points towards a shared global perspective, that the lessons from that war still resonate widely, regardless of current political differences. For you listening, especially with an eye on UPSC, understanding this historical foundation of the current world order and the threats to it is really fundamental.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Kovachich talks about this tension between, on one hand, this general desire for peace and prosperity, and on the other hand, these rising trends of deglobalization and unilateralism.
Yeah, it's a real contradiction, he points out, and he uses the U.S. tariff war, particularly against China, but also others, as a prime example of this move away from cooperation.
So just to clarify for listeners, deglobalization meaning this potential pullback from global interconnectedness and unilateralism where a country sort of goes it alone on policy.
Exactly, and he gives some historical context, reminding us that the global trade system we've known, based on globalization and countries specializing in what they do best.
The international division of labor.
Right. That system really developed in the 20th century, and interestingly, the U.S. was a major force behind it initially and benefited greatly from it.
So these recent tariffs mark a real shift. He mentions the U.S.-China trade war specifically, which kicked off under the Trump administration.
Correct. And the stated goal back then was primarily about reducing the U.S. trade deficit with China.
But Kovachich offers a different perspective on why those deficits exist.
He does. He suggests that a really significant factor, one that maybe doesn't get enough airtime, is the unique role of the U.S. dollar as the world's main reserve currency.
How does that play into it?
Well, that status itself can create structural reasons for trade imbalances. It's a complex economic point, but for those prepping for UPSC economics papers, understanding reserve currency effects is definitely key here.
And practically speaking, have the tariffs actually worked to reduce the deficit?
According to Kovachich's analysis, no. They haven't really proven effective in achieving that stated goal.
Okay, so if the tariffs aren't fixing the deficit, and they're still largely in place under the current U.S. administration.
Exactly. Kovachich points that out. The tariff and non-tariff barriers continue. And he gives the example of restrictions on exporting high-tech goods to China.
Like semiconductors.
Yes, precisely those kinds of high-value products that China used to import a lot of from the U.S.
Which, theoretically, selling more of those could have helped the deficit.
That's his implication. So the fact that these exports are being restricted suggests the goal might be something else entirely.
What does he think the real reason is?
His interpretation is that it looks more like a strategic effort to slow down China's technological development, to prevent China becoming a serious competitor in these really key advanced sectors where the U.S. has traditionally dominated.
Trying to maintain dominance, basically.
That seems to be his reading of the situation.
And how did China respond initially?
At first, Kovachich notes, China's countermeasures were quite limited, targeted. But as the U.S. actions escalated...
China pushed back harder?
Yes. Their capacity and their willingness to respond grew. When the U.S. imposed much higher tariffs, China retaliated symmetrically, hitting U.S. goods with tariffs too.
Showing they weren't going to just absorb it.
Definitely. There was even a quote he references from the Chinese Foreign Ministry, something quite stark.
Oh.
Along the lines of, if war is what the U.S. wants, be it a tariff war, a trade war, or any other type of war, we're ready to fight till the end.
Wow, that's strong language. Really underlines the seriousness of these trade tensions.
It absolutely does. It shows the high stakes involved, moving beyond just economics into broader strategic friction.
So for you, our listener, especially thinking about UPSC analysis, digging into this trade dynamic, the stated reasons versus potential strategic motives is crucial for understanding current global economic and geopolitical shifts.
Absolutely essential. Which then leads into the final part of Kovachich's discussion. Thinking about the role China and Russia might play together in promoting a different kind of global governance, something more inclusive, more multilateral.
Multilateralism, just to remind everyone, basically meaning countries working together on shared problems rather than going it alone.
Exactly. And Kovachich emphasizes that China and Russia actually see eye to eye on many big international questions. Their cooperation in places like the UN Security Council is already quite significant.
And beyond the UN.
He points to their work within groups like BRICS, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus the newer members and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO.
As platforms for pushing this multilateral approach.
Yes. Advocating for reforms in global institutions like development banks to make them more responsive to the needs of developing countries, the global south.
So they see themselves as having a shared responsibility.
As major powers, yes. Kovachich argues they see a joint role in promoting stability and prosperity, especially across the huge Eurasian landmass, and supporting a world order that's based firmly on the principles of the UN Charter.
The very charter born out of WWII.
Which brings it all back around, doesn't it? The symbolism of the leaders' meeting during this 80th anniversary commemoration.
It's not just looking back.
No. He frames it as also looking forward, reaffirming their commitment to an international system designed to prevent those kinds of tragedies from happening again. Their meeting sends a message about their shared vision for how global governance should work.
And for you listening, trying to make sense of the shifting global power dynamics, this China-Russia cooperation, how it's evolving, is a really key piece of the puzzle. It represents one potential direction for the future international order.
Definitely something to watch closely.
Okay, so let's try and pull the threads together from this Global Times interview. Key takeaways.
Wow.
First, Xi's visit to Russia is highly strategic, going beyond just the Victory Day events.
Right. Second, there's a shared emphasis on the lessons of WWII and a real concern about historical distortion being used for political ends.
Third, the U.S.-China trade situation is complex, with Kovachich suggesting strategic competition is a major driver behind U.S. actions, not just trade deficits.
And finally, China and Russia are actively promoting a more multilateral global order, working through the UN, BRICS, ESCARO, and advocating for reforms favoring the global South.
Understanding how all these pieces connect is, well, pretty crucial for staying on top of the big shifts happening globally right now.
Especially for UPSC aspirants, linking these historical, economic, and geopolitical factors is exactly the kind of analysis needed.
So let's leave you with a thought to chew on. Considering everything we've discussed, the history, the current tensions, Kovachich's perspective from the Global Times, what do you think are the biggest challenges, but also maybe the biggest opportunities for the future of multilateralism for countries working together on a global scale?
That's a big question, but a really important one to reflect on.
Absolutely. And if you found this deep dive helpful, especially for your UPSC prep or just understanding world events, please do give us a like, subscribe to the channel.
And leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts or any further questions you have about this topic.
And just to reiterate, our discussion today was based on that interview with Leonid Kovachich published in the Global Times. Thanks for tuning in.